Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal exciting news on Monday, June 30th, 2025. First, Sidwell had been waiting in the shadows for the perfect moment to strike, and now, with Sonny's decision to hide Natalia in a location no one could trace, that moment had arrived. To Sidwell, this wasn't just a personal slight, it was an act of war. Natalia had been his leverage, his carefully placed pawn, and Sonny's bold move had shattered his plans. But Sidwell was not the kind of man to retreat when cornered. If he couldn't control Sonny through influence and manipulation, then he would dismantle him piece by piece, starting with the people Sonny loved the most. Revenge, for Sidwell, wasn't about making noise, it was about making sure the enemy bled slowly and painfully. The strategy was methodical. Sidwell began targeting Sonny's children in ways that didn't leave fingerprints but did leave scars. The first move came in the form of surveillance. Donna, the youngest and most vulnerable of Sonny's children, became the unspoken target. A black SUV with tinted windows began appearing near her school during dismissal hours. It didn't approach. It didn't make contact. But it was there, watching. Then came the pictures, crisp, close-up images of Donna playing in the schoolyard, sitting on a bench, walking home. Each photo arrived on Sonny's phone at odd hours, without captions, without threats, only a blood-red X drawn across the bottom corner of each one. The message was chilling and unmistakable. Sonny increased security immediately, deploying guards around his children and tightening all travel schedules. But Sidwell anticipated that. His next target was Avery. In a crowded public park, a woman claiming to be a family friend tried to lead Avery away from her nanny with a fake story and a false sense of familiarity. The nanny resisted, the crowd intervened, and the woman disappeared before police could question her. Once again, no one could prove it was Sidwell's doing. But Sonny didn't need proof, he knew the rhythm of violence, the tempo of intimidation. Sidwell was orchestrating a silent assault, one calculated to destroy a man not through force, but through fear. Even more unnerving than the physical threats were the psychological games. Christina began receiving anonymous texts at night, cryptic messages about choices, safety, and consequences. Dante's apartment was broken into, but nothing was stolen, only a single baby photo of him and Sonny was left face down on the kitchen counter. Michael noticed strangers outside his office building, people who looked just long enough to make him uncomfortable. The stress started to fracture the once indestructible shield Sonny had built around his family. Every child became a potential target. Every shadow became a threat. And still, Sidwell remained invisible, his fingerprints nowhere, his face unseen. What made Sidwell especially dangerous was not his rage, but his patience. He wasn't aiming to kill Sonny or even take his empire in one blow. He wanted to make Sonny live in a constant state of dread. He wanted him to wake up each morning wondering which of his children would suffer next, to lie awake at night picturing every horrible scenario that could unfold. Sidwell was engineering a slow collapse, knowing that a man like Sonny, who drew his strength from protecting those he loved, would wither under the realization that he could no longer keep them safe. And in this realization, Sidwell found satisfaction. Because to him, victory wasn't loud. It was quiet, cold, and complete. Meanwhile, Sonny's world began to unravel. His allies questioned his judgment, his enemies sensed vulnerability, and his family grew increasingly paranoid. Natalia's disappearance had already raised questions within the business network, and now the attacks on the children created tension within the inner circle. Sonny found himself trapped between fury and helplessness. He wanted to retaliate, to unleash the full force of his power, but Sidwell had left him with no target. The war was psychological, and Sonny was losing ground with every whispered rumor, every scared glance from his daughters, every sleepless night where silence felt more threatening than noise. Sidwell's influence continued to spread, infecting even those who weren't directly involved. Carly was forced to move with heightened security, and even Jason had to temporarily pull back from his operations to assess risk levels. The once mighty machine that Sunny had operated with ruthless efficiency was slowing, faltering under the weight of fear. And Sidwell, from afar, watched with the satisfaction of a man who had crafted a masterpiece of destruction. His goal was never to destroy Sunny's body, but to obliterate his spirit, reduce him to a shell of the man who once ruled Port Charles with confidence and unshakable control. As the attacks continued, Sunny faced a harrowing choice: to escalate and risk open war that could spill blood across his own doorstep, or to step back and regroup, knowing that with every passing moment, Sidwell was digging deeper into the core of his family. The silence became deafening. The weight of unspoken threats began to choke any remaining hope. But in the depths of that darkness, Sunny knew one thing for certain: Sidwell wouldn't stop until everything Sunny loved had been tainted, terrorized, or destroyed. And unless Sunny found a way to strike back in kind, the final blow wouldn't come with a gunshot. It would come with a whisper, a phone call, a funeral, or worse, an empty bed where his daughter should have been. Second, Willow had once believed that love, truth, and maternal devotion would be enough to reunite her with her children, but those ideals had long since withered beneath the crushing weight of Michael's threat. The moment he told her that marrying Drew would mean forfeiting any chance of seeing Wiley and Amelia again, something inside her shifted. It wasn't grief, it was fire. It was determination, born not of clarity but of desperation. Willow was no longer chasing a dream of happiness. She was chasing strategy. She was chasing control. And in her eyes, the fastest way to fight back against Michael's ruthless conditions was to become Drew's wife, cementing a new alliance not of love, but of leverage. Even as Drew's public image crumbled under the weight of scandal during his most recent press conference, Willow refused to flinch. She convinced herself that his disgrace would not derail their plan, because this marriage wasn't about public opinion. It was about legal positioning, about optics in court, and about asserting her independence from Michael's tyranny. She threw herself into wedding preparations with a mechanical focus, as if every flower arrangement and seating chart could inch her closer to maternal vindication. The speed at which the event was planned raised eyebrows even among Drew's closest allies, but he said nothing to slow her down. In fact, he appeared oddly triumphant. Drew knew the deeper Willow sank into the illusion of strategic necessity, the less likely she was to step back and reassess his role in her suffering. He positioned himself as her only ally, her only escape from Michael's chokehold. But beneath his sympathetic exterior was a man who had orchestrated much of this chaos from the start, sowing division and doubt between Willow and Michael until he emerged as the savior she never truly asked for. Watching Willow push forward with their wedding despite the looming damage to his reputation only fed his ego. She was becoming exactly what he needed: devoted, desperate, and blind to the larger game being played. As the wedding date drew closer, Willow began to isolate herself further. She stopped answering calls from Nina, distanced herself from Carly, and even ignored subtle warnings from Jason, who had grown increasingly suspicious of Drew's motives. She told herself they didn't understand. That they were judging her. That they didn't know what it meant to lose a child, not once, but twice. And so she shut them out. The bridal gown was selected, the venue secured, and a small guest list assembled that notably excluded the very people who had once been her support system. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a war declaration cloaked in white silk and champagne. She didn't care if the public saw her as unstable. She didn't care if Michael used it against her in court. In her mind, marrying Drew was the only path forward. But what Willow couldn't see, what she refused to see, was the subtle shift in Drew's demeanor each day that passed. The more committed she became, the less effort he put into pretending he still cared about their original mission. Gone were the impassioned speeches about co-parenting and courtroom battles. In their place were casual dismissals and vague reassurances. He became more interested in press interviews than parenting strategies, more focused on spinning their engagement story to the media than attending meetings with custody lawyers. Willow, emotionally exhausted and fueled by tunnel vision, clung to his presence like a lifeline. She had wagered everything on this alliance, and she was too far in to admit she might have been wrong. After the wedding, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The smiles disappeared, the warmth evaporated. Drew, now basking in the success of publicly marrying the woman he claimed to love, began to retreat from the promises he had made. He no longer answered calls about legal updates. He cancelled meetings with family court advisors. When Willow pressed him for timelines or next steps, he offered vague platitudes or redirected the conversation. She began to feel the chill of betrayal settling into their home, subtle but unmistakable. The man who once promised to help her fight for Wiley and Amelia had seemingly vanished, replaced by someone more invested in his image than her reality. And Willow, for all her efforts, realized that she may have been used. Michael, meanwhile, kept his distance. True to his word, he limited Willow's access to the children. Every supervised visit became a negotiation. Every phone call required coordination and approval. And though he said nothing publicly about her marriage to Drew, his silence was damning. He didn't need to speak. He had already won. Willow, now married to a man whose commitment was unraveling, found herself more alone than ever before, stripped of custody, family support, and increasingly, her own sense of self. The dream of reuniting with her children had become a nightmare of political maneuvering and emotional abandonment. In private, Drew's ambitions began to surface more clearly. With Willow legally bound to him, he began leveraging their marriage in business deals, portraying himself as a family man who had overcome hardship and scandal. He referenced their wedding in interviews, parading her loyalty as proof of his moral standing. But behind closed doors, he offered her little more than cold acknowledgments and superficial gestures. Willow, once the symbol of maternal devotion, had become a prop. And though she tried to deny it, to tell herself it was just a rough start, the truth loomed larger each day. Drew had never intended to share custody of her pain. He had only wanted the image, the story, the woman who would make him look whole. As the days passed, the walls around Willow closed in. Each morning she awoke in a house that felt colder. Each night she lay in bed next to a man whose promises had faded into silence. And in the distance, the laughter of Wiley and Amelia. Once her only guiding light, grew fainter. She had believed she was being strategic. That marrying Drew would empower her. But instead, she had traded one manipulator for another, and in doing so, had lost the very thing she set out to protect. Herself. Her children. Her truth. Now, all she had left was the weight of a white dress and the bitter realization that some wars, once chosen, cannot be undone. Only survived. Finally, Trina had always believed in the sanctity of trust. Especially after everything she had endured with those she loved most. So when she learned that Kai had betrayed her confidence, something in her heart fractured. Curtis had entrusted her with the sensitive mission to find Jacinda, a mission rooted in desperation and the need for truth. It was a plan meant to stay silent, hidden from those who would twist it to their advantage. But somehow, Drew had found out. The moment Drew began publicly humiliating Curtis, tightening his grip on Portia with veiled threats and escalating tension within their already fragile household, Trina knew something had gone horribly wrong. The pressure was suffocating. Curtis was growing more distant, Portia was crumbling under stress, and all the carefully laid pieces of their search for Jacinda had been swept away by a force they couldn't predict, or control. In the days that followed, the truth revealed itself like a knife to the chest. Trina confronted Kai, demanding clarity, and what she heard left her breathless. Kai had spoken to Drew. Not in anger, not by mistake, but with full intention. Whether he thought he was protecting someone or gaining favor, the result was undeniable. He had undermined the mission. He had betrayed not only Curtis, but Trina as well. The depth of that betrayal stung with particular venom because Trina had believed in Kai. She had defended him, confided in him, even considered him part of the rare few she could truly trust. And now, standing before him with the confirmation of his duplicity ringing in her ears, she felt nothing but devastation. Her anger erupted with raw, unfiltered power. For the first time since the betrayal, Trina didn't hold back. She raised her voice, her words cutting through the silence with fury sharpened by pain. She demanded to know why, how, and what kind of man could look her in the eye while simultaneously stabbing her family in the back. But even as she let the rage pour out, she quickly realized something far more powerful had taken root: apathy. She no longer wanted explanations. She no longer cared for his apologies or his reasoning. Kai's betrayal had stripped her of any desire to repair what was broken. In her heart, the bond had already dissolved. Whatever they had, or could have had, was now beyond resurrection. Drew, meanwhile, seized upon the information Kai had delivered like a predator tasting blood. With Jacinda's trail now exposed, he maneuvered to dismantle any effort Curtis might have made to protect her. Drew's behavior grew more erratic, his tone more domineering, especially toward Portia, whose resolve had begun to shatter beneath the pressure. What had once been a private search for truth had become a battleground, and Kai had willingly handed the enemy the map. Trina watched it all unfold from a distance, feeling powerless to undo the damage but determined to never forget the source of the collapse. Kai had chosen his side. And it wasn't hers. The betrayal wasn't just about information. It was about intimacy. It was about someone Trina had welcomed into her inner world, taking that privilege and using it as a weapon. She began to replay every conversation, every glance, every moment where Kai had nodded or smiled while secretly concealing a lie. And the more she remembered, the colder she became. There was no room for forgiveness in her heart, not this time. The consequences of Kai's choice weren't just limited to Curtis or Portia. They reached into the very fabric of Trina's belief system, forcing her to reevaluate who she could trust, who deserved her loyalty, and who never truly earned it in the first place. While Kai struggled with the fallout, trying to explain, trying to defend, Trina closed the door, figuratively and emotionally. She wanted nothing more from him. Not his guilt, not his sorrow, not his regret. To her, he had made a transaction, her trust in exchange for his own motives, whatever they were. And if he thought Drew would reward that kind of betrayal, he was more naive than she believed. Because Drew was not a man who shared power. He was a user, a manipulator, someone who would discard even his allies once their usefulness expired. Kai would learn this the hard way, and when he did, Trina would not be there to witness it. She had already moved on, not out of peace, but out of necessity. Curtis, for his part, was left to pick up the pieces of his broken plan. The setback pushed him into a darker state of mind, one where trust became scarce and allies were few. Portia tried to hold him together, but the emotional toll had already done its damage. Their partnership, already strained by secrets and stress, began to unravel further under Drew's relentless pressure. Trina could see it all happening in real time, the slow erosion of her family's unity, catalyzed by one man's betrayal and another's hunger for dominance. It was a storm she couldn't stop, but one she vowed to outlast. In the end, Kai's actions ensured that he would never again be welcome in the space Trina called safe. The price of betrayal wasn't just emotional distance, it was exile. He had underestimated the depth of her loyalty to her family and overestimated the power of his own influence. And as Drew continued to tighten his grip, believing he had won another round in his war of control, he failed to see the quiet shift in Trina's resolve. She may have lost her faith in Kai, but she had not lost her fire. She was watching. She was learning. And one day, she would make sure both Kai and Drew paid dearly for what they had broken. In the aftermath of so many betrayals and shifting allegiances, the emotional landscape of Port Charles had become a battleground littered with fractured trust, unraveling loyalty, and wounds too deep for apology. Trina, once full of hope and conviction, had learned the cost of faith placed in the wrong person. Kai's betrayal wasn't just a mistake, it was a turning point that reshaped how she saw the world around her. And while she mourned the loss of what could have been, she made no space for regret. She had clarity now, and in that clarity came strength. She would rebuild, not with blind optimism, but with sharpened instincts and a heart guarded by the memory of those who had deceived her. Willow, too, was forced to reckon with the consequences of her own desperation. What began as a calculated move to outmaneuver Michael had led her into the arms of a man whose promises were as hollow as his ambition was vast. Drew had used her, not to reunite a family, but to rehabilitate his own image and secure his place in the spotlight. And in the end, Willow found herself more isolated than ever, robbed of her children, her allies, and the dream she once fought for. The wedding ring on her finger no longer felt like a symbol of power, it felt like a shackle forged from her own miscalculations. Curtis and Portia stood on the edge of collapse, their mission to find Jacinda shattered by Drew's interference and Kai's betrayal. What was once a united front had splintered under pressure, and both now bore the emotional scars of a war they had no time to prepare for. Drew's hunger for control had left ruin in his wake. Ruin he wore like armor while presenting himself to the world as a victim, a leader, a father. But behind closed doors, he had become the very thing he once claimed to oppose, a man who thrived on manipulation and broke others to feel whole. And Drew's reckoning had not yet come, but it would. Because those he had underestimated, Willow with her quiet rage, Trina with her sharpened focus, Curtis with his unyielding sense of justice, were no longer playing by the rules he had written. They were watching, waiting, aligning. One betrayal could be forgiven, two might be endured, but three was war.